It is evening and Cody, dressed to impress, notices Tracy alone at a table at the Metro Court pool. She's there having a child-free evening and asks what he's dressed for. Cody reveals that he has a date. When Tracy discovers it's with Ava, she threatens him that the thug would shoot him, run him over with her car, or blow him up. Tracy doesn't understand why he can't fall in love with someone else. Cody blurts out, "This isn't about love, I'm doing it for the money." She asks in horror if Ava is paying him to have sex with her, but Cody replies someone else is paying him to distract Ava. Tracy disagrees, offers to assist him if he needs money, and thinks he is more than this. Tracy says he needs to get over his poor opinion of himself. He's a good man who shouldn't sell himself so easily. Tracy tells him that if he's in difficulty, she'll help him, but he says he's not. Tracy is relieved and decides to return home, observing that it is late and the Rugrats should be in bed. She assures Cody he does not have to do this. She respects him and hopes he will learn to appreciate himself. Ava discusses her new guy with Nina down in the bar. Ava encounters Nina, who needs to speak with a buddy. She does see, however, that Ava is dressed for a planned event. Ava explains that she pushed them back when she called. Nina assumes she has a date with Rick. Ava notes that she dumped Rick, although he is unaware of it. She laments that Rick was constantly preoccupied with Liz. Nina asks Ava who the new man is and is surprised to hear that it's Cody. Ava says Cody is pleasant to be around, and he appears to value her, which is refreshing after jerks like Nicholas and Rick. Nina only wants her friend to be cautious. Ava claims they're simply having some fun, and she can handle Cody Bell. Brennan comes clean with Carly, sort of in the alcove. Brennan admits to Carly that he hasn't been completely honest with her about his duty in Port Charles. He is here because there is a threat in Port Charles that has global repercussions. He's informing her because he may have to disappear on her, and he's not sure how long. Carly is relieved because she had expected him to reveal that he has a wife and children hidden away. Carly and Brennan talk about GH. Carly realizes that he can't tell her more because his work requires confidentiality, and she trusts him. He describes her as the most amazing woman he's ever encountered. Carly vows that if he is honest about what he can say, she will not leave him. Will Alexis follow through on her plan? Alexis discovers Molly at the cafe working on her manuscript, but Molly pretends she is researching a case. Alexis explains that Drew and Scout are heading to DC. She explains that she went to Monica to see if she could persuade him not to relocate, but in the meanwhile, she believes they should look into examples that justify a grandparent taking custody of a youngster. Molly isn't sure if this is the best decision, but Alexis believes Scout needs family and relationships, and Sam would be upset with Drew's actions. Drew is a poorer father than viewers realize, as Alexis complains that he never attends Scout's extracurricular activities, and she spends the most of her time alone in her room. Molly warns that her mother's chances of obtaining custody are poor to none, which may prompt Drew to forbid them from seeing Scout altogether. Even worse, he might turn her against them. Laura plays peacemaker when Dante threatens to arrest Albrecht in Laura's office. Laura tells him to go for a walk and cool off, so he departs. Laura informs Albrecht that she can't put Rocco's demands ahead of her own. Albrecht claims she and Rocco have bonded, which Lulu dismisses, and the doctor warns he would be wounded if she pulls away abruptly. She also reminds Lulu that she hasn't been Rocco's mother in years. Aside from not being there for him when he was in a coma, the first thing she did when she awoke was desert him to find his sister. Laura responds, "How dare you imply that my daughter hasn't been a good mother?" Laura recognizes Albrecht's desire for a connection with Rocco in order to connect with Britt. If she wants to be a part of the boy's life, she must demonstrate that she will prioritize his needs over her own sadness, as well as respect for his parents. Dante returns and Laura says this didn't have to develop into what it did, and they owe it to Rocco to find common ground. Albrecht admits that she should not have spoken what she did to Lulu. She recognizes that Rocco is fortunate to have such a loving family, and she is content to have them present the next time they speak. Lulu snaps, "Fine." Albrecht leaves, and Lulu reveals she lost it when Albrecht referred to herself as Rocco's grandmother. Laura believes in her own way and Albrecht cares about Rocco. Anna tells Jason almost everything at the Quartermain estate. Anna hints to Jason that Britt's disappearance may not have been her decision, and that she has discovered that the resort Britt is staying at is being investigated by the WSB. Anna informs Jason Brennan that she feels the 5 poppies are a front, and that something bad is going on. Anna asks whether Britt is there of her own free will, or because she has been compelled. Jason wonders if this could include Faison. Anna claims he died, but his work lives on, and Britt once assisted him with it. Jason inquires about the WSB's take on what is going on at this lab. She's not sure. Unsure whether she should run, call for aid, or intercede. That was all it needed for another voice to emerge from the chaos, sharp, terrified, and full of obstinate purpose. Let him go. It was Jocelyn, and she charged into the scene from the opposite end of the alley, holding her phone in one hand and something metallic in the other. She did not hesitate. Before Jason could get between her and the danger, she swung the thing, which appeared to be a heavy flashlight, right at the attacker's forearm. The impact was strong enough to release the garrote, and Vaughn lurched forward, gasping for air, and fell to his knees. The assailant snarled and turned toward Jocelyn, but Jason had already arrived, jumping into the path like a wall of muscle and determination. His hand rushed out, catching the man's wrist, and twisted forcefully till the garrote clattered to the ground. The battle was quick but savage, with Jason forcing the attacker against the brick wall, his voice low and lethal as he demanded a name. But the man did not respond. He simply spat on the ground and ripped free, running into the darkness before Jason could stop him. Britt dropped to Vaughn's side and checked his pulse with unsteady hands. He was breathing, but his voice was raspy when he attempted to speak. "I didn't see his face," he said, looking between Jason and Britt. Britt felt a knot in her stomach as she said, "But he knew me." Whoever dispatched that assailant was not acting at random. This was purposeful and targeted. Jason hunkered beside them, his gaze sweeping the alley, each shadow a possible hiding place for another menace. "We have to get him inside," he replied, his tone leaving no room for disagreement. "Now." The 3 of them managed to get Vaughn up and half carried him through the club's back entrance. Britt saw astonished expressions and people stopped mid-conversation, but Jason didn't stop until they were in a quieter back room with the door latched. Jocelyn was still breathing hard, and her adrenaline caused her words to come out in bursts. "He was going to kill him. I didn't think, I just acted." Her voice had a quiver that she was clearly attempting to conceal, her chin raised firmly as if daring anybody to judge her. Britt looked into her eyes and saw the truth. Yes, Jocelyn had acted without hesitation, but the shock of what could have happened was now beginning to sink in. Jason's stare softened somewhat. "You did the right thing," he replied, and the simple reassurance helped to calm her. But then his focus returned to Vaughn, and his expression tightened. "Who have you dealt with? This wasn't a random attack." Vaughn gulped hard, his throat crimson from the garrote biting into his skin. "You don't want to get caught up in this, Jason. Trust me." But Jason did not stir or blink, and Vaughn's shoulders dropped after a time. "I've been operating some side projects, nothing major. Just off the books. I believe someone would like to send a message." Jason pressed. "Or a specific person?" Vaughn hesitated, and that was all Jason needed to know. It was someone specific. Britt saw Jason's jaw clench as that old, dangerous calm settled over him like steel. He gave her the same expression she'd seen before, indicating that he'd already resolved to deal with things on his own. Britt's mind kept going back to the first time she saw Jason in the alley, while Vaughn detailed what little he knew, names half-whispered in back rooms, vague warnings that had been ignored until now. She doubted that whatever had led him back to Port Charles had nothing to do with what had just happened, and the fact that Jocelyn had been there, putting herself in risk without hesitation, exacerbated the situation. Jason was already overprotective of those he loved about, and seeing Jocelyn in that way, Britt knew it would pique his interest. When Vaughn was stable enough to be left with a friend who promised to keep an eye on him, Jason urged Britt and Jocelyn to accompany him outside. The air was cooler now with a slight scent of rain, yet the tension had not subsided. "You can't stay here," Jason told Jocelyn, his voice harsh. "If whoever that was comes back, they won't care who's in their way." "I'm not running," Jocelyn replied, crossing her arms. "If I hadn't shown up when I did, Vaughn would be dead." Her tone was defiant, but there was also an undercurrent of fear she couldn't conceal. Jason's eyes softened again, but his voice remained solid. That is exactly why you need to be cautious. Tonight you got lucky. Next time. He didn't continue the phrase because he didn't need to. Britt watched them, an unpleasant feeling tightening in her chest. This wasn't simply about Vaughn or a failed backroom agreement. There was a wider picture here, one she suspected Jason had seen but wasn't willing to share. That scared her since Jason's silence indicated that things were worse than he was letting on. As they strolled back toward the hospital parking lot, Britt felt herself falling in step with him. Are you really back? She spoke quietly. Jason didn't respond immediately away, scanning the street as if he expected trouble around every corner. Finally he replied, for now. It wasn't much, but it was enough to let her know that whatever had drawn him to Port Charles wasn't going away. When they arrived at her car, Jason came to a halt, his stare fixed on her for an extended period of time. Stay away from Vaughn for a while, he told him. If someone's targeting him, I don't want you caught in the crossfire. Britt wanted to disagree, to tell him she wasn't the type of person who needed to be protected, but the memory of that wire tightening around Vaughn's neck was still too fresh. She nodded grudgingly, watching as Jason turned and walked away into the night, Jocelyn trailing him a few strides after, still asking questions he wasn't. When it came time to crawl beneath the covers, Vaughn worried if Jocelyn was fine with it. Jocelyn didn't want Vaughn to sleep on the floor, so they both got into bed and said their goodnights. Back with Britt, she was concerned about her prescription not being in her room because she couldn't miss a single dose. Pascal insisted it was in the lab, where her boss expected her to work. Britt's medication may be taken away entirely if she did not follow instructions. Pascal also received a call from John Moore, aka Jason, as he made a reservation at the resort. According to General Hospital teasers, Jason will face some unexpected twists and turns when he gets in Dalmatia. Britt's heart hammered as she stood in the dark light of her modest apartment, the distant hum of the city outside barely audible through the closed window. Her hands trembled slightly as she went for the orange pill container on the counter, its label faded from months of use. The drug was her lifeline, a connection to security in a world that frequently seemed out of control. She had been diagnosed with anxiety and panic disorder years before, and while therapy helped, it was the tiny white pills that kept the worst of the symptoms at away. Tonight, however, the weight of the day hung to her like damp clothes, and she wasn't sure if the dose would be sufficient to calm the storm forming in her head. She twisted the cap off, shook one pill into her hand, and drank it with a drink of water, her gaze drawn to the clock. It was late, almost midnight, and she needed to sleep, but her mind kept returning to Jocelyn and Vaughn. Jocelyn and Vaughn, her closest pals, were stretched across her bed in the next room, their soft laughing echoing through the thin walls. They had stopped by earlier that evening, a surprise visit that evolved into hours of chat, wine, and shared secrets. Britt had always coveted their comfort with one another, the way they appeared to glide through life with a lightness she couldn't quite fathom. Jocelyn, with her keen wit and contagious energy, could make anyone feel like the center of the universe. Vaughn, quieter but no less captivating, had a way of listening that made you feel seen, his dark eyes steady and warm. They were an unusual couple, with Jocelyn's fire countering Vaughn's calm, but their relationship was unbreakable. Britt had known them since college, three misfits who met in a crowded lecture hall and stayed together ever since. Tonight, however, felt different. The apartment was modest, with only one bedroom and barely enough space for Britt's possessions, let alone guests. When Jocelyn and Vaughn arrived with a bottle of cheap Merlot and a bag of takeaway, Britt had no reservations about letting them crash. The couch was lumpy and too short for either of them to sleep properly, so Jocelyn's suggestion to pile into Britt's queen-sized bed sounded like the most natural thing in the world. They'd done it before, back in their dorm days, when late-night study sessions transformed into sleepovers full of hushed confessions and suppressed laughter. However, years later, the prospect of the three of them sharing a bed felt electrified, like a wire humming with electricity. Britt couldn't explain why, but the notion of it caused a flutter in her chest that she couldn't wholly attribute to her nervousness. She set down the pill bottle and leaned against the counter, shutting her eyes. The drug would take a few minutes to take effect, calming her racing thoughts. She attempted to concentrate on her breathing, as her therapist had instructed her, but her thoughts kept traveling to the scene in the next room. Jocelyn and Vaughn were undoubtedly still conversing, their voices low and intimate, as they always were as the hour became late. Britt wondered what they were saying, if they were referring to her, or if they had even noticed she had sneaked out to the kitchen. She felt guilty about leaving them, but the truth was that she wanted a time to herself. The day had been hard, with work obligations and a heated phone call with her mother, who had no idea why Britt hadn't gotten over her worry. The medication helped, but it wasn't a cure, and sometimes the weight of carrying it all felt too much. Britt opened her eyes and looked at the doorway leading to her bedroom. She could hear Jocelyn's loud, unself-conscious giggle, followed by Vaughn's quiet whisper, which was most likely mocking her about something. The sound was reassuring, reminding her that she wasn't alone, even if she felt like she was on the outside looking in. She pushed from the counter and made her way to the bedroom, her bare feet resting quietly on the wooden floor. The door was slightly ajar, so she hesitated and peered inside. Jocelyn lay on her side, raised up on one elbow, her dark hair falling over the pillow. Vaughn was spread down alongside her, one arm tucked behind his head and the other lying carelessly on his stomach. They seemed at ease, as if they belonged there in her bed, in her space. Britt felt a peculiar combination of warmth and anxiety, as if she were trespassing on someone's private space, despite the fact that it was her own apartment. "Hey," Jocelyn remarked, noticing her. "Are you okay?" Her voice was quiet, but there was a hint of anxiety in it, as if she could detect Britt's uncertainty. "Yeah," Britt responded immediately, attempting a smile. "Just needed some water." She held out the glass in her hand as proof, despite the fact that it was practically empty. Vaughn twisted his head to face her, his countenance unreadable in the dim light. "Are you sure?" he inquired, his voice steady yet soft. "You've been quiet tonight." Britt shrugged as she entered the room. "Just tired, I guess." She laid the glass on the nightstand and climbed onto the bed, settling on the edge so as not to take up too much space. The mattress sunk slightly under her weight, and she could feel the warmth of their bodies nearby, Jocelyn's perfume mixed with the clean, earthy scent of Vaughn's cologne. It was comfortable, but it also made her acutely aware of every movement and breath. "You don't have to lie to us," Jocelyn replied, her tone light but direct. She reached out and moved a strand of hair away from Britt's face, lingering for longer than necessary. "We know when you're freaking out." Britt's cheeks flushed as she looked down at her hands, tugging the hem of her big t-shirt. "I'm not freaking out," she murmured, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She despised how open she was with them, how they could see through her defenses without trying. It was one of her favorite things about them, but it also made her feel vulnerable, like a raw nerve. Vaughn shifted, lying onto his side and facing her. "You don't have to talk about it," he remarked softly and reassuringly. "But we're here, you know." Britt nodded, her throat hard. She wanted to tell them everything. How the drug made her feel like a stranger in her own body, how she was afraid of losing control, and how she worried she'd never be enough for them or anyone else. But the words would not come, trapped behind a wall she'd created over years of keeping her problems to herself. Instead, she lay down, curling up on her side to face Jocelyn, who smiled little and knowingly. "Get over here," Jocelyn whispered, scooting closer and throwing her arm over Britt's waist. "You're too far away." Britt let out a trembling laugh, allowing herself to be drawn into Jocelyn's embrace. Vaughn shifted behind her, his presence steady and grounded, and Britt felt the strain in her chest loosen. The medication was beginning to work, smoothing the rough edges of her thoughts, and the proximity of her pals also helped. She closed her eyes, concentrating on the pattern of Jocelyn's breathing, and the tiny creak of the bed as Vaughn shifted his position. This shared environment seemed intimate, but not inappropriate. Felt like home. As the night progressed, their discussion faded into a comfortable calm, interrupted only by the occasional rustle of sheets or a faint sigh. Britt's mind was quieter now, the medication working, but she couldn't ignore the feeling that something had changed between them. It wasn't simply the bed they shared. It was something deeper, a vulnerability they were all wary of. She wondered if Jocelyn and Vaughn felt the same way, or if it was just her anxiousness intensifying every glance and touch. She wanted to ask, to put words to the unspoken thing hanging in the air, but she had no idea how. Instead, she allowed herself be immersed in the moment, the warmth of their bodies anchoring her to the present. Hours later, as the first light of morning broke through the curtains, Britt awoke, her body heavy with sleep but her mind sharper than it had been in days. Jocelyn remained nestled against her, one arm carelessly slung across Britt's stomach, her breathing heavy and steady. Vaughn lay on his back, one hand lying on a pillow near Britt's head, his fingers brushing over her hair. She lay there for a long time, watching them sleep and experiencing a weird sensation of calm. The prescription had gotten her through the night, but it was Jocelyn and Vaughn who made her feel ready to face the day. They were her safe haven, her constant, and as she fell back asleep, she wondered whether she could allow herself to believe she was enough. The morning arrived too quickly, with the city waking up outside and the realities of the day setting in. Britt slid out of bed silently, taking care not to wake Jocelyn or Vaughn, and headed to the kitchen. She grabbed for the pill container again, her movements as automatic as breathing, but this time her hands were firm. The weight from the night before lingered, but it wasn't oppressive. It was comfortable, like a blanket she could throw around herself. She had no idea what the future held for her or the three of them, but for the time being, she had this memory of sharing a bed, a space, and a calm understanding. And it was enough.